Shalom. This week we are reading Parshat Vayechi, the final portion in the book of Breshit. This is the portion of the blessings that our forefather Yaakov gives over to his children, each son according to his essence, blessings that are laden with messianic tension. And this Torah portion sees the last years of the reunion between Jacob and his beloved son Yosef, and now that Yaakov knows that his time to leave this world is approaching, he knows that time is coming for him to die, he asks Yosef to make sure that he is buried in the tomb of his fathers. He makes him swear, and he knows that Yosef has the power to facilitate this. So we read, "Please do not bury me in Egypt, for I will lie down with my fathers, and you shall transport me out of Egypt and bury me in their tomb." And Yosef said, "I personally will do as you have said." But Yaakov replied, "Swear to me." And he swore to him. Then Israel prostrated himself towards the head of the bed. Later, we read, again, when Yosef is told that Yaakov is ill, Yosef comes to Yaakov, and we read that Yaakov says to his son Yosef, "But as for me, when I came from Padan, Rachel died on me in the land of Canaan on the road, while there was still a stretch of land to go to Ephrat, and I buried her there on the road to Ephrat, which is Bethlehem." Rashi tells us something unbelievable. He says that Yaakov was concerned that perhaps Yosef had some sort of resentment in his heart. Perhaps he held it against him. Perhaps he was going to be feeling, what? You're asking me to do for you what you didn't do for my mother? You're asking me to bother to make sure that you are buried in a family plot, but you left my mother along the road. And Yaakov was explaining to Yosef, it's not like that. Besides the fact that Rachel died suddenly on the road, Yaakov had a prophetic vision. And this is connected to the moving verses in Jeremiah chapter 31. A voice is heard in Ramah, lamentations and bitter weeping. Rachel is crying for her children. Yaakov knew that eventually his children would be exiled at the time of the destruction of the temple, and that his children would be forced to march out of the land and into exile. And Rachel, she would be able to intercede for her children. And indeed, the sages tell us that at the time of the exile of the children of Israel, Rachel came out of her tomb, witnessed her children being marched into exile, and implored the heavens, beseeched God for mercy for their return to the land. And indeed, according to the continuation of the verses in Jeremiah 31, it was on account of her heartfelt prayer that the decree would be eventually rescinded, and indeed her children would return, as the language of the prophet there in Jeremiah, return to their borders. So, this was something that was necessary, Yaakov is explaining to Yosef, because Rachel would be able to intercede for her children. She would have this power of prayer, which our sages teach us still works for us today. The relationship of Yaakov and Rachel was so unique. We know that Rachel was the main wife to Yaakov, the love of his life, and even in these words, "As for me, Rachel died on me on the way," there is some pathos that escapes the lips of the patriarch. And how difficult this separation must have been, to live the rest of his life without her. And yet we know in Hashem's impeccable planning that the absence of Rachel from the stage of Jewish history had a profound effect on that history, and her early death, her death in childhood with Binyamin, had a profound effect on Yosef and Binyamin, on their nature, on the very essence and character of those tribes. Yosef and Binyamin were connected they understood things that no one else could. Our sages tell us that the Holy Temple was built with the Holy of Holies, that part of the temple that houses the Shekhinah, the divine presence in this world, that was built within the tribal portion of Binyamin. Because Binyamin, who was born on the road, literally understood what it means to be a guest in this world, to be a wayfarer. So these things have tremendous repercussions. But yet, in understanding the scenario that we are describing, the separation of Yaakov and Rachel and the burial of Rachel along the way, there is a bit of a conundrum. There is a bit of a which came first situation. Because recall that when Yaakov first met Rachel in Parshat Vayechi in chapter 29 and verse 11, he kissed her, his soulmate, kissed her, and he raised his voice and cried. And as Rashi cites, our sages teach us that he saw, with divine inspiration, that he would not be buried together with her, and this must be a very serious problem. So he saw that he wouldn't be buried with her, thus he cried. He already knew at that point that this is a fact, and something which is beyond his control. Yet in the very same parsha, in chapter 31, regarding the incident of the disappearance of and theft of the idol of Lavan, which was actually done by Rachel in an effort to wean her father of his idolatrous addiction, Yaakov uttered these words. He didn't know or believe that anyone from his camp had taken the idol, and he said, if someone from amongst us took it, he shall not live. And as the verse continues, chapter 31 and verse 32, he did not know that Rachel took them. And there's some sort of concept that his words actually made an impression, and the utterance of a tzaddik is something that is a power, and thus he is somehow implicated in Rachel's death, which occurred shortly afterwards on account of his words, perhaps. So we can say that something had to be established, more than just a pattern, a process had to be begun that would somehow lead to Rachel's presence along the way. And you know, again, as with every teaching of our sages, this is not only an issue of this particular idea. This is a powerful metaphor that transcends this particular idiom. This is not anecdotal. Rachel here represents a powerful force in the unfolding saga of the redemption and return of her children. And what is that? How does that affect us today? And how do we understand that dynamic in the continuation of the saga of the redemption of Israel today? Indeed, after Yaakov explained to his son Yosef, Rachel died on me in the land of Canaan on the road. In the next verse, in chapter 48, verse 8, then Israel saw Joseph's sons, and he said, who are these? And Joseph said to his father, they are my sons whom God has given me. And he said, bring them to me if you please, and I will bless them. And while it's true that the next verse says, now Israel's eyes were heavy with age, he could not see, our sages don't think that that's the reason why Yaakov, who is here called Israel, which consistently indicates a higher level of prophecy and revelation, Israel saw Joseph's sons. He saw them, but he said, who are these? And our sages are disturbed by these words. What did he mean, who are these? And they say that actually one interpretation is that he was looking into the future, and he apparently saw something unseemly. For a moment, prophecy departed from him, and he saw someone in the future that perhaps isn't worthy of blessing. Again, how could it be that he said, who are these? Referring to Ephraim and Manasseh, he lived in Egypt for 17 years. So this isn't the first time that he's seeing them. They had many Shabbat dinners together. They had much family time together. And yet now he's saying, who are these? It's not the first time in 17 years that he sees them. So our sages say he saw in the future, for example, that Jeroboam and Achav would descend from Ephraim, and Yehu and his sons from Manasseh. So he said, who are these? These are not worthy of my blessing. This is a blip in the timeline of the descendants of Yosef. But yet at the same time, we can say another idea, which is entirely different and much more positive and connected and based on another aspect of this mystique of Rachel, and that underscores more the concept of her coming out and her participation with her children, her portion, the portion of her children, and her role in the redemption. And I think that is connected to another important and central prophecy and tradition, this one as we find in the book of Obadiah. The concept that is mentioned here, on Mount Zion there will be refuge, it will be holy, and the house of Jacob will inherit those who had dispossessed them. The house of Jacob will be fire, the house of Joseph a flame, the house of Esau for straw, and they will ignite them and devour them. This is a clear reference to a concept that our sages discuss, which is that the enemies of Israel fall at the hands of the descendants of Yosef. The enemies of Israel fall at the hands of the children of Rachel. And perhaps Yaakov, looking towards the future, towards our time, and said, Mi Ela, who are these? Bring them to me and I will bless them. Yaakov saw all of the Yosefians today living in their tribal lands, before whom, just as Haman fell only before Mordechai, who is a descendant of Benjamin, before whom the enemies of Israel will fall. There is something inherent about the children of Yosef, who are today living in their tribal lands, who are today making such a difference to the Jewish people, who are today taking such an active role in the redemption of Israel, whom Rachel sees, who Yaakov, as Israel, saw. Take them to me, and I will bless them, because they are making all of the difference. They are the ones who are bringing about the redemption. Who are these brave, courageous children living today, the Yosefians, in the tribal lands of Israel? Bring them to me, and I will bless them, for they are the key players in the redemption.